1962. In a small Puritan village on the edge of the New England wilderness, shadows stretched longer than daylight. The people of Salem believed they lived in a world where angels and demons moved just as surely as their neighbors. Life was fragile. Crops failed without warning. Sickness swept through households, and wars raged at the frontier. Every misfortune demanded an explanation, and the most terrifying answer was always close at hand. The devil was near. It began with whispers. A group of young girls convulsed and screamed in ways no one could understand. Their bodies twisted, their voices cried out, and the village was gripped with dread. Neighbors leaned closer, searching for meaning. Some spoke of curses, others of unseen hands pulling at the innocent. And soon, one word echoed through the meeting houses and across the fields: witchcraft. What followed would unravel families, destroy reputations, and lead to the deaths of 20 men and women. But the truth of Salem was never so simple. Behind the accusations lay fear, old rivalries, greed, and a hunger for control. It was less a battle with witches and more a battle with human weakness. The Salem witch trials have long been remembered as a dark and mysterious episode of American history. Yet when we look closer, the story is not only about superstition. It is about how communities can collapse under the weight of fear, how justice can be twisted into vengeance, and how fragile truth becomes when society decides to believe in lies. This is not just a tale of witches. This is the story of Salem, and the dark truth behind the trials that turned neighbor against neighbor, and faith into fire. Life in Salem Village at the end of the 17th century was anything but peaceful. The people who lived there were Puritans, strict, deeply religious settlers who believed that every aspect of existence was under the eye of God. To them, the world was not divided by shades of gray but by sharp contrasts: good versus evil, heaven versus hell, Christ versus Satan. This worldview created a constant pressure to live righteously, for even the smallest slip could be interpreted as a victory for the devil. The land itself seemed to mirror this struggle. To one side stretched thick forests, untamed and mysterious, which Puritans associated with danger and the devil's domain. To the other side was the vast Atlantic, a reminder of isolation and distance from the old world. Every failed harvest, every child lost to disease, every raid by native warriors at the frontier only reinforced the sense that they lived in a world perpetually threatened by unseen forces. Political and social divisions added to the tension. Salem was split between Salem Town, a prosperous center of trade and commerce, and Salem Village, a poorer farming community that resented the wealth and independence of its neighbors. Families quarreled bitterly over property lines, inheritance rights, and access to church leadership. The community was fractured, with old grudges lying just beneath the surface. On top of this, war haunted the people's memories. Only a few years earlier, King William's War had left the northern frontier drenched in blood. Refugees from Maine and New Hampshire brought tales of massacres, fueling paranoia and a belief that Satan was actively working to destroy New England. This fragile, divided, and fearful society was like dry kindling. It only needed a spark, one strange incident, one accusation whispered in fear, for the flames of hysteria to consume Salem. In the cold winter of January 1692, Salem Village witnessed the first signs of a storm that would soon engulf the community. 9-year-old Betty Paris, the daughter of Reverend Samuel Paris, and her cousin Abigail Williams, began to suffer from mysterious fits. They screamed uncontrollably, threw objects across the room, contorted their bodies into unnatural positions, and spoke in strange, broken voices. Neighbors described the girls as if they were being physically attacked by invisible hands. The village doctor, William Griggs, examined them and, unable to find any natural explanation, reached a chilling conclusion. The girls were under the influence of witchcraft. In a society already steeped in fear of the devil, this diagnosis carried the weight of absolute truth. To the Puritan mind, the devil was not an abstract idea. He was an active, living presence, recruiting human agents to do his bidding. Soon, other young girls in Salem began to display the same terrifying symptoms. Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, and Mary Walcott joined Betty and Abigail in their convulsions. They claimed to see shadowy specters, to feel pricking pins, and to be choked by unseen forces. Their cries filled the village with dread. When pressed to identify their tormentors, the girls named 3 women who lived on the margins of society. Tituba, Reverend Paris's enslaved servant from the Caribbean, who told stories of magic and spirits that fascinated the children. Sarah Good, a destitute beggar woman, often seen muttering angrily when refused charity. Sarah Osborne, a sickly widow, who defied Puritan norms by pursuing property rights and marrying beneath her station. These accusations carried devastating power. In the minds of Salem's villagers, it made sense that the devil would choose outcasts as his instruments. By pointing their fingers, the girls unleashed a chain reaction that could no longer be contained. The spark had been struck. Fear began to burn through Salem like wildfire, and soon, no one, no matter how respected, wealthy, or devout, would be safe from suspicion. The accusations that began in a handful of households quickly spread across Salem village like an epidemic of fear. Once the girls named their supposed tormentors, the machinery of Puritan justice began to grind into motion. What started as whispers soon became formal charges, and before long, the courtroom became the stage where hysteria played out in full view of the community. By March 1692, Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne stood before local magistrates. Under immense pressure, Tituba confessed to practicing witchcraft. But her testimony was no admission of guilt born from truth. It was a desperate attempt to survive. She spun tales of black dogs, red cats, and the devil's book where witches signed their names in blood. Her words terrified the villagers, and worse, she claimed that many others were in league with Satan. Suddenly, the circle of suspicion widened far beyond the first 3 accused. The colony's leaders, eager to restore order, established the Court of Oyer and Terminer, a special tribunal dedicated to trying witchcraft cases. But the court's rules of evidence were unlike anything resembling true justice. They admitted spectral evidence, the claim that an accused person's spirit had appeared to a victim in a dream or vision. In practice, this meant an accuser's word, often a child's, could condemn a neighbor to death. As the months wore on, the trials turned into grim spectacles. Villagers packed into the courtroom to watch the accused plead for their lives. Some broke down in tears, others maintained their innocence with dignity. None of it mattered once the afflicted girls began to writhe and scream, claiming to see the specters of the accused attacking them in real time. To the judges, this was proof enough. In June, Bridget Bishop became the first to hang on Gallows Hill. A tavern owner with a reputation for defiance, she was an easy target. In July, Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old grandmother known for her piety, was executed despite widespread disbelief in her guilt. The noose did not discriminate, young or old, wealthy or poor. Even the most devout Christians could be branded as Satan's agents. Perhaps the most haunting case was that of Giles Corey, an 81-year-old farmer. Refusing to enter a plea, knowing that doing so would forfeit his land to the state, Corey was subjected to peine forte et dure, pressed under heavy stones until he either confessed or died. For days, he endured unimaginable agony. His last recorded words said to be, "More weight." He was crushed to death without ever standing trial. By autumn, 20 people had been executed, 19 hanged, 1 pressed to death, and more than 200 others accused or imprisoned. The jails overflowed, chains clinked in the night, and Salem lived under a pall of suspicion. Each accusation led to another. Each execution confirmed the belief that Satan's influence was real. But beneath the gallows, beneath the cries of the afflicted and the judgments of the court, something darker was at work. A community unraveling, driven not by proof, but by fear and vengeance. And in Salem, the line between justice and murder had vanished. Beneath the surface of prayers, courtrooms, and hanging ropes, the Salem witch trials were never only about invisible spirits. The deeper truth was uglier. Power, greed, and control fueled the hysteria as much as fear of the devil. Salem Village was already a community divided long before the first accusation. Families fought bitterly over property lines, inheritance rights, and influence in church matters. The witchcraft trials gave them a weapon more potent than any musket or plow dispute. An accusation could destroy an enemy, strip them of land, and elevate one's own standing. It was no coincidence that many of the accused owned valuable farms, or stood in the way of neighbors eager to expand their holdings. For the powerful men of Massachusetts, the crisis served another purpose. The colony had recently lost its original royal charter, and authority was fragile. By fueling the trials, magistrates and ministers projected strength, showing that they could root out Satan himself from the heart of New England. Each public hanging reinforced their control, reminding the community that obedience to both God and government was non-negotiable. Fear became a tool of governance. Gender, too, played a decisive role. Of the hundreds accused, the vast majority were women, many of them widows, healers, or outspoken personalities who lived outside the narrow expectations of Puritan society. A woman who owned land, argued with neighbors, or defied her husband could be branded as suspicious. The trials revealed the patriarchal anxieties of a society desperate to contain female independence by demonizing it. And then there were the Puritan ministers, men like Cotton Mather, who thundered from the pulpit that the devil stalked New England.
For the Lord's mercy
Their sermons stoked terror,
forever.
but also preserved their influence at a moment when faith was waning under political and economic pressures. To admit doubt in the girls' testimonies was to risk being accused of sympathy with witches. Silence, or complicity, became survival. The true darkness of Salem was not in the specters the girls claimed to see, but in how human beings turned fear into a currency of power. Neighbors used it to settle grudges. Leaders used it to consolidate control. Men used it to silence women. And together, they created a spiral of destruction that had little to do with witchcraft, and everything to do with the raw, dangerous instincts that lie beneath civilization. The lesson is chilling. Salem was not undone by witches. It was undone by its own people. and that truth is far more terrifying than any spell. By the autumn of 1692, the fever that had consumed Salem was beginning to burn itself out. The accusations, once confined to beggars and outsiders, had spread so far and wide that even the most powerful families could no longer ignore the danger. When whispers of witchcraft reached the household of Governor William Phips, his own wife rumored to be under suspicion, the very foundation of authority began to tremble. At the same time, doubts were surfacing among ministers and townspeople.
It is a matter of profound doubt.
The use of spectral evidence was increasingly questioned. How could visions and dreams, impossible to prove, serve as grounds to take a human life? Even Cotton Mather, one of the most vocal supporters of the trials, urged caution against condemning on invisible testimony alone. In a society built upon scripture and order, the contradictions became impossible to ignore. Public executions, once grim affirmations of justice, began to unsettle the community. The image of Rebecca Nurse, a pious grandmother, hanged before the eyes of her grieving neighbors, weighed heavily on Salem's conscience. The shocking death of Giles Corey, pressed to death under stones, left many wondering if the devil's true triumph was not in witchcraft, but in the cruelty of their own courts. On October 29, 1692, Governor Phips officially dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer. A new court was established that no longer accepted spectral evidence, and the flood of convictions slowed to a trickle. By the spring of 1693, most remaining prisoners were released, though many had languished for months in cold, disease-ridden jails, their families ruined by debts and shame. But for the 20 who had already been executed, nothing could undo the damage. Empty chairs sat at dinner tables. Fields lay untended. Children grew up with the knowledge that their mothers or fathers had died as witches. Salem itself carried wounds that would never fully heal. The trials collapsed not because the people suddenly found courage or compassion, but because hysteria had overreached. When the net of suspicion threatened the very leaders who had once encouraged it, reason finally returned.
May God curse.
Yet by then, Salem's reckoning had already come, and the stain of its fear-driven justice would never wash away. The Salem witch trials did not end with the closing of the courts. Their shadow stretched across generations, a haunting reminder of how fear can unravel the very fabric of a community. For the families of the executed, the pain lingered for decades. Widows and children carried the stigma of being kin to witches. Property was lost, reputations destroyed, and trust among neighbors shattered beyond repair. In the years that followed, some attempts at reconciliation were made. Judges and ministers who had once thundered against the accused publicly confessed their error. Samuel Sewell, one of the trial judges, stood before his congregation in 1697 and begged God's forgiveness for the innocent blood he had helped spill. The Massachusetts government eventually granted small sums of financial compensation to the victims' families, though no amount of silver could repair what had been torn apart. Yet the true legacy of Salem lies not in the money paid or apologies offered, but in the questions it forces us to ask. How could an entire society allow superstition to override reason? How could ordinary men and women watch their neighbors hanged on the word of frightened children? And most disturbingly, could it happen again? Historians see Salem as more than an isolated tragedy. It was a warning of what occurs when fear and authority combine unchecked. The trials show how quickly communities can collapse when suspicion replaces trust, when difference becomes danger, and when justice is twisted into a weapon. The same forces, mass hysteria, scapegoating, blind obedience, reappear throughout history, from political purges to cultural panics. The dark truth is this: Salem was never truly about witches. It was about power, prejudice, and the peril of letting fear rule the human heart. The devil may not have walked the streets of Massachusetts in 1692, but something far more destructive did. The willingness of people to believe lies and punish the innocent. And that is why Salem still matters today. Its story endures as a mirror, forcing each generation to confront its own fears and to ask whether, under the right conditions, we too might build our own gallows on the hill.